Okay, good morning. Roald Dahl, Danny Champion of the World, Chapter 17. Charlie and I are going to read this to you. 2 minutes later, we were safely inside the taxi and cruising slowly down the bumpy track towards the road. My father was bursting with pride and excitement. He kept leaning forward and tapping Charlie Ginch on the shoulder, saying, "How about it, Charlie? How about this for a haul?" And Charlie kept glancing back, pop-eyed at the huge, bulging sacks. "Cripes, man," he kept saying. "How did you do it?" "Danny did it," my father said proudly. "My son Danny is the champion of the world." Then Charlie said, "I reckon pheasants is going to be the bit of a scarce up at Mr Victor Hazel's opening day shooting tomorrow, eh, William?" "I imagine they are, Charlie," my father said. "I imagine they are." "All those fancy folk," old Charlie said, "driving in for miles around in their big shiny cars, and there won't be a blinking bird anywhere for them to shoot." Charlie Ginch started chuckling and chortling so much he nearly dropped off the road. "Dad," I said, "what on earth are you going to do with all those pheasants?" "Share them out amongst our friends," my father said. "There's a dozen of them for Charlie here to start with." "All right, Charlie, that suits me," Charlie said. "Then there'll be a dozen for Doc Spencer and another dozen for Enoch Samways." "You don't mean Sergeant Samways?" I gasped. "Of course," my father said. "Enoch Samways is one of my best and oldest friends." "Enoch's a good boy," Charlie Ginch said. "He's a lovely lad." Sergeant Enoch Samways, as I knew very well, was the village policeman. He was a large, plump man with a bristling black moustache, and he strode up and down our high street with proud and measured tread of a man who knows he is in charge. The silver buttons on his uniform sparkled like diamonds, and the mere sight of him frightened so much I used to cross over to the other side of the street whenever he approached. Enoch Samways, like a piece of roasted pheasant, as much as the next man, my father said. "I reckon he knows a thing or two about catching them as well," Charlie Ginch said. I was astounded, but as I also rather pleased, because now I knew that great Sergeant Samways was human like the rest of us. Perhaps I wouldn't be so scared of him in the future. "Are you going to share them out tonight, Dad?" I asked. No, not tonight, Danny. "No, you must always walk home empty-handed after a poacher's trip. You can never be sure Mr Rabbit or one of his gang isn't waiting for you by the front door to see him carrying him anything." He's a crafty one, that Mr Rabbit is," Charlie Ginch said. "The best thing is to pour a pound of sugar in the petrol tank of his car when he ain't looking. Then he can't even come snooping around your house later." We always made sure to give the keepers a little sugar in their tanks before we went out on a poach. "I'm surprised you didn't bother to do that, Willem, especially on a big job like this one." "What does the sugar do?" I asked. "Blimey, it gums up the whole ruddy works," Charlie Ginch said. "You got to take the entire engine to pieces before it all go again, after it's had the sugar. Ain't that right, Willem?" "That's right, Charlie," my father said. We came off the bumpy track onto the main road, and Charlie Ginch got out of the old taxi, in top gear, and headed for the village. "Are you dumping these birds at Mrs Clipstone's place tonight?" he asked. "Yes," my father told him. "Drive straight to Mrs Clipstone's." "Why Mrs Clipstone's?" I asked. She's got to do with it." "Mrs Clipstone delivers everyone's pheasants," my father said. "Haven't I told you that?" "No, Dad, you haven't," I said, aghast. I was now more stunned than ever. Mrs Grace Clipstone was the wife of the Reverend Lionel Clipstone, the local vicar. "Always choose a respectable woman to deliver your pheasants," my father announced. "That's correct, Charlie, isn't it?" "Mrs Clipstone's a right smart lady," Charlie said. I could hardly believe that they were saying what they were saying. It was beginning to look as though just about everybody in the entire district was in on this poaching lark. "The vicar is very fond of roasted pheasant for his dinner," my father said. "Who isn't?" Charlie Ginch said, and he stared, chuckling to himself all over again. We were driving through the village now, and the street lamps were lit, and the men were wandering home from the pubs, all full of beer. I saw Mr Snooty, my headmaster, a bit wobbly on his feet and trying to let himself in secretly through the side door of his house, but he didn't see was Mrs Snooty's sharp, frosty face sticking out of the upstairs window, watching him. "You know something, Danny," my father said. "We've done these birds a great kindness, putting them to sleep in this nice, painless way. They'd have had a nasty time of it tomorrow if we hadn't got them first. Rotten shots most of them fellows are," Charlie Ginch said. At least half the birds finished up winged and wounded. The taxi turned left and swung it through the gates of the vicarage. There were no lights on in the house and nobody met us. My father and I got out and dumped the pheasants in the coal shed at the rear. Then we said goodbye to Charlie Ginch and began to walk the 2 miles back to the filling station. Soon we had left the village behind us and we were in open country. There was no one else in sight, just the two of us. My father and I tried were happy, striding out along the curvy country road to the light of the moon. I can't believe it, my father kept saying. I simply cannot believe we pulled it off. My heart was still thumping, I said. So is mine, but oh, Danny, he cried, laying a hand on my shoulder. Didn't we have a glorious time? We were walking right in the middle of the road as though it were a private drive. We're running through our country estate, and we were the lords of all we surveyed. Do you realise, Danny, my father said, that on this very night, on this Friday, the 13th of September, you and I have actually bagged 120 prime pheasants from Mr. Victor Hazel's wood. I looked at my father. His face was alight with happiness and his arms were waving all over the place as he went prancing along the middle of the road with his funny iron foot. Clink, clink, clink. Roasted pheasant, he cried out, addressing the moon and the entire countryside. The finest and the most succulent dish on earth. I don't suppose you've ever eaten roast pheasant, have you, Danny? Never, I said. You wait, he cried. You just wait till you taste it. It has an unbelievable flavour. It's a sheer magic. Does it have to be roasted, Dad? Of course it has to be roasted. You don't ever boil a young bird. Why do you ask that? I was wondering how we would do the roasted. I said, don't you have to have an oven or something? Of course, he said, but we don't have an oven, Dad. All we've got is a paraffin burner. I know, he said, and that is why I've decided to buy an oven. Buy one, I cried. Yes, Danny, he said, with such a great and glorious stock of pheasants on our hands, it's important that we have the proper equipment. Therefore, we shall go back to the village tomorrow morning and we shall buy an electric oven. We can get one at the Wheelers and we'll put it in the workshop. We've got plenty of electric plugs in the workshop. Won't it be very expensive? No expense is too great for roasted pheasants, my father announced superbly. And don't forget, Danny, before we put the bird in the oven, we have to lay strips of fat bacon across the breast to keep it nice and juicy, and bread sauce too. We shall have to make bread sauce. We must never have roasted without it. Lashings of bread sauce. There are 3 things you must always have with roasted pheasants: bread sauce, chipped potatoes, and boiled parsnips. There was half a minute silence as we both allowed ourselves the pleasure of dreaming about those beautiful foods. And I'll tell you what else we've got to get, my father said. We've got to get one of those deep freezers where you can store things for months and months and months and they never go rotten. Dad, I said, no, but you don't realise, Danny, that even after we've given the birds up all our friends to Charlie Ginch and Reverend Clipston and Doc Spencer and Enoch Samways and all the rest of them, there'll still be about 50 left for us. That is why we're going to need a deep freezer. But it'll cost the earth, and worth every penny of it, he cried. Just imagine, Danny, my boy, any time we fancy a nice roasted pheasant for our supper, all we've got to do is open up the lid of the freezer and help ourselves. Kings and queens don't live any better than this. A barn owl flew across the road in front of us, its great white wings waving slowly in the moonlight. Did your mum have an oven in the kitchen, Dad? I asked when you were a boy. She had something better than an oven, he said. It was called a cooker. It was a great, big, long, black thing, and we used to stoke it up with coal and keep it going for 24 hours a day. It never went out. And if we didn't have any coal, we used bits of wood. Could you roast pheasants in it? You could roast anything in it, Danny. It was a lovely thing, that old cooker. It used to keep the whole house warm in the winter. And you never had a cooker of your own, did you, Dad? You and Mum, when you got married? Or an oven? No, he said, we couldn't afford things like that. Then how did you roast your pheasants? Ah, he said, that was quite a trick. We used to build a fire outside the caravan and roast them on a spit, the way the gypsies do. What's a spit, I asked. It's just a long metal spike that you stick through the pheasant and you put it over the fire and keep turning it round. What you do is you push 2 forked sticks onto the ground, one on each side of the fire, and you rest the spit on the forks. Did it roast them well? Fairly well, he said, but an oven would do it better. Listen, Danny, Mr. Wheeler has all sorts of marvellous ovens in his shop now. He's got one in there with so many dials and knobs, it looks like the cockpit of an aeroplane. Is that one that you want to buy, Dad? No, I don't know, he said. We'll decide tomorrow. We kept walking and soon we saw the filling station glimmering in the moonlight ahead of us. Will Mr. Rabbit be waiting for us, do you think, Dad? I asked. If he is, you won't see him, Danny. They always hide and watch from behind a hedge or a tree, and they only come out if they're carrying a sack over your shoulder or if your pocket is bulged when there's something suspicious. We are carrying nothing at all, so don't worry about it. Whether or not Mr. Rabbit was watching us, we entered the filling station and headed for the caravan. I don't know. We saw no sign of them. Inside the caravan, my father lit the paraffin lamp and I lit the burner and put the kettle on to make us a cup of cocoa each. That, my father said, as we sat sipping our hot cocoa a few minutes later, was the greatest time I've ever had in my life. Excellent chapter.